Welcome everyone to Inside Academia, the weekly program where we look behind the ivory curtain, seeking a frank discussion of American education. I'm your host, Andy Nash. My guest today is Marty Nemko. Marty's a contributing editor to U.S. News and World Report, a career counselor and coach to over 3,500 clients, a San Francisco talk radio host, and author of Cool Careers for Dummies. His website, martynemko.com, has over 600 published articles and an active blog and Twitter stream. Marty, thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
Okay, so Marty, about May of 2008, you published a very controversial piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education, having to do with the bachelor's degree being, as you say, one of the world's most overrated products. Can you summarize that for us? What makes the bachelor's degree an overrated product in this day and age?
Because the most important thing that you could get out of a college education, other than the piece of paper, would be growth in reading skills, writing skills, critical thinking, mathematical reasoning, information literacy, etc. And the evidence is that you grow remarkably little on all those dimensions in a college, when going for a bachelor's degree, especially if you were not a very good student in high school. And we're admitting over 200,000 students a year who graduated in the bottom 40% of their high school class. So it's a bad deal for everybody in terms of value received for the money and time involved, especially since most students do not graduate in 4 years at all, but only fewer than half graduate even if given 6 years.
So is it just a bad deal for the people that presumably don't necessarily belong there? I'm assuming that's your premise, or was there something more intrinsic about it that is making it a bad deal for everyone?
It's a bad deal for everyone because, first of all, when you admit low-achieving students into the college, the professors are forced to dumb down the instruction for everybody, so everybody pays. But there are more broadly applicable problems. That is, that every decision that a higher education institution makes is designed to aggrandize itself, promote its research, and always at the student's expense. So, for example, professors are hired and promoted based largely on how well they do research, usually abstract, abstruse research, arcane research that has little or no relevance to the real world, but that is the currency of the realm in higher ed. So you've got these professors who are doing research on the doppelganger and the causes of the Peloponnesian War and why white males in the year 1950 suck, and with little regard to how well they teach undergraduate students, which means how well they can be transformative human beings who inspire and teach the basics of reading and writing and critical thinking and mathematical reasoning. That is the core problem. And then they spend as little money as they absolutely can in the way in which they instruct. So they herd students into large lecture halls, or have classes on TV, or they have graduate students teach them, or even undergraduate students teach them. So at every turn, universities do whatever possible to provide the cheapest education so they have money for their arcane research.
You know, there's so many conflating and compounding issues within higher education. Tuition is just one of them. It's skyrocketed at just about any university over the course of the last few decades, infinitely far above and beyond the rate of inflation, it would seem. And so when you have all these courses, a university always has traditionally made the argument that you need to take all of these different sampling, smorgasbord of courses from across the curriculum so as to be a quote-unquote well-rounded individual. Is there still any credence to that argument today, given the fact that the college education costs so much more per credit than it did, say, 40 or 50 years ago?
Two separate issues. One is the tuition cost. Part of the reason the tuition cost has gone up is because of the Robin Hood phenomenon. Colleges are so eager to get more students of color and low-income students that they jack up the tuition of people who are middle class so that they can redistribute and give free rides or certainly greatly discounted prices to low-achieving kids. Ironically, the people low-achieving kids are the least likely to solve our social problems, cure cancer, etc. But that is the way of the world. That's one of the ways one of the reasons they increase tuition. The other is bureaucracies tend to expand. They tend to metastasize. They're cancers. So every administrator feels, quote, overworked, or sees some great new initiative that he really feels or she feels is necessary, and so they expand the bureaucracy. Those two reasons, and also an increase of the primacy of research as a unit of prestige for university has grown ever more. So formerly small state colleges that did have a mission that was centrally around teaching has now, in an attempt to gain more prestige among their peers, tried to become universities and therefore ever more effort, even at those, quote, formerly teaching institutions, teaching-related institutions, are now devoted to the research. But the other thing where I disagree with you is I think, in theory, the true well-rounded liberal arts education, if well dispensed, if taught by great teachers who really do teach kids the relevance of Plato and Aristotle and Augustine and Wittgenstein to today's life, that is very important to living a life well led. College is not supposed to just be about career. A mathematical course that teaches you to think risk in terms of risk-reward probabilistically, to analyze statistics you'll read in a newspaper article, or even if you're going to the doctor and they're prescribing a certain treatment, for you to be able to analyze those statistics, that is valuable. Unfortunately, there is a Grand Canyon of difference between that theoretical ideal of the liberal arts education and how it's actually dispensed in the real world, because those professors are so research rather than teaching obsessed, and because they are fascinated with endless arcana rather than the things that will be transformative for people's lives.
Well, you make a great point there, and you're absolutely right that traditionally college education was more than just simple careerism. But most young people are sold on the idea that the only ticket to success is to go to college. And so consequently, they do think of it, at least on the surface, as a career step. There's an article by Michael Konsal that was published recently called The 21st Century Retreat from Public Higher Education. And in it, he cites the Brown Report in context of the recent protests that were going on in England regarding the cost of education. And he said, currently, it says here, instead, we should think of higher education as a lightly regulated market in which consumer demand in the form of student choice is sovereign in determining what is offered by service providers, i.e. universities. Do you agree with that premise, that the universities be regarded as that?
I think, like everything else, nuance is important. I think student desires need to be taken into consideration, and especially as we send the highest percentage of high school students on to college in history, we have a gross oversupply not only of college degree holders in the obvious straw men of sociology, women's studies, art history, etc., but even in molecular biology and the like, because colleges are like every other sleazy business, avaricious and trying to get every student body they can get in there to get tuition, or to get the more students they get in, again, especially low-income students, people of color, that's the more, if it's a state-run institution, the state will give all kinds of brownie points or withhold the punishments as long as they have enough minorities and low-achieving kids. So we have this huge number of kids going to college, and because of that oversupply, even if they defy the odds and graduate, and as I said, only fewer than half graduate even given 6 years, is really, really, really hard to get a job. And, it's very easy to be lofty and say, oh, I'm interested in studying Plato, but if you're going to be unemployed and homeless, it's not going to do you a lot of good. So I think that colleges need to be responsive to the reality that kids need to be more career ready, and, for example, teach what may be the most important career readiness skill of all, which is entrepreneurship or critical thinking or public speaking.
Do you think that this is partially attributable to a lack of sufficient centralization within the institution in terms of either the faculty senate or whoever makes these core curricular decisions, or what is the real purpose of it? Is it just that administrators, for example, are more obsessed with research programs and bringing in big research grant dollars and aggrandizing their campuses with buildings? I mean, where is the lack of a focus on the totality of an undergraduate curriculum from start to finish? Where is that focus supposed to come from?
The core problem is in what is valued. What is valued in America is, or at least in higher education, is intellectual, is research. Because frankly, people who we choose to be our professors, who are these PhDs, who are really very smart in their own ways, they find teaching undergraduates boring. They consider that low status. Writing a textbook is low status. That which is practical is less interesting than creating cool new theoretical models. To be honest, and this is hubristic of me to say, I'm a great teacher, but I'm also more fascinated with trying to create new knowledge, even if it's arcane, even if it's not useful. And so if universities that are ostensibly supposed to teach undergraduates will hire really smart people who they're going to be much by their nature, going to be much more interested in creating cool, new, interesting, arcane new knowledge, because that's intellectually thorny and challenging, than teaching intro to reasoning to ever dumber bodies of college students. So the problem is that there need to be undergraduate-centric institutions which are specifically aimed at undergraduates and not hire PhDs. The people best qualified to teach undergraduates are people who have only bachelor's degrees themselves and who maybe even, to some extent, struggle to learn the material, because the person who struggled to get an A is the person who really understands in their soul what it takes to take an average college student and teach them the material. The core problem comes in who we select to be our higher education professors in undergraduate institutions. I would advocate two major things. I would advocate the creation of undergraduate-only institutions in which the instructors were hired purely based on how transformative they are as human beings, as instructors of average college students. And of course, at a Harvard, where you get really smart students, they don't have to be average students. Transformative in dealing with whatever level of students are at that college, and who have the ability to truly change the fabric of students' ways of thinking about quantitative reasoning. To get them not just memorize quadratic equations, but to get them to think probabilistically, to get them to think rigorously, to be able to speak in public well. The people who are going to be able to teach that well are the opposite in many ways of the people who are PhDs who are research oriented. The universities like to argue, and it's completely specious, that people who have those professors, their interest in research makes them better teachers, maybe slightly incrementally, but at their core, they are grossly the wrong people to teach undergraduates. That's number one. And the second thing, in addition to having very undergraduate-centric institutions, is a college report card. Until the public realizes how little value added is provided by the typical undergraduate education, even at prestigious brand name institutions, if you look at the small amount of value added, that will make the public realize that indeed higher ed is America's most overrated product, and therefore there needs to be a college report card where every college should be required to provide the average growth, freshman through senior growth, in reading comprehension, critical thinking, public speaking, quantitative analysis, and etc., and make that very prominent, as well as the 4-, 5-, and 6-year graduation rates disaggregated, that is broken down based on what your high school grades were. So in other words, if an A student who had a 2,000 on the SAT, clearly they're going to gain more than somebody who had a 3.0 average and a 1,400 SAT combined. So you break down the growth in freshman to senior growth based on what the student's high school record is. You make that single statistic plus graduation rates, but even leaving that out, if you simply put the average growth from freshman to senior and require colleges to prominently post that on their websites, that will do more to force the public will then be forced to, will outcry, and then colleges will be forced to change who they hire,
right,
whether they teach classes in enormous lecture classes, etc.
As if a disclaimer, for lack of a better word, right?
As not a disclaimer, no, as consumer information that is critical.
Oh, okay.
We require every tire to have molded in its sidewall essentially a report card. Mm-hmm. What is its tread life? What is its temperature rating? What is its traction rating? Right. If we require it for tires, should we not require that kind of a report card molded into the website's front homepage of every college and university?
One last question I want to ask you about on the financial aspect and the cost of education. Colleges and universities have countlessly said that they have to raise the tuition by the amount that they do simply because they don't get enough public support.
That's a lie.
What do you say to that?
They lie. They raise tuition because every time they are one of the most powerful lobbies in America. They have been able to lobby great increases in the amount of financial aid, and they've managed to lobby so that the only kind of loan that cannot be discharged through bankruptcy is a student loan. So they get their money, and every time they are successful in lobbying the government to provide more financial aid, what does that enable a college to do? It enables them to raise their tuition. So that, because they say, hey, great, the students are going to get more money from the college, we can then go and raise our tuition. That's really it. They are a business. Higher education must be viewed as a business like any other business. What they're all about is making more money to do what they want to do, which in the case of universities primarily is to expand their bureaucracies and or to do more research, 99% of which is of very, very little value. And most times universities know up front, and the funders know it's going to be of little value, but it's kind of the little machine they keep going.
Very good. That's about all the time we have. Again, people can find out more information about your articles, your books, and your blog at martynemko.com. Marty, I want to thank you again for joining us today.
My pleasure. That spelling is weird. It's MartyNemko. Nemko.com.
All right, very good. This has been Inside Academia with Andy Nash. Please join us again next week, as every week, as we take you behind the ivory curtain.